Cue motivational music. Hello and welcome to the podcast. My name's Dean and I'm a designer on a quest. A quest to further understand the creative industry and learn as much as this noggin will hold. Join me as I share my discoveries and tap into the minds of some of the most well-respected creatives in the world. This is my creative therapy. Hello and welcome to episode 10. Today I'm joined by Airbnb's creative strategist Eliot Garcia Weisberg, and in this episode we talk about his journey throughout his career, his unexpected meeting with Apple's product designer, now Chief Design Officer Jony Ive, how digital design, which is a little rough around the edges, actually works well for some content creators, like Gary Vee, Joe Rogan, those types of guys. We also talk about his experience working alongside the co-founder of Airbnb and loads more. How's things anyway, man?
Great. Things are good. It's Friday and I'm halfway through the day here, so I couldn't be any better right now. I have a 1-year-old, actually is about 14 months old now. And so it really just changes your whole perception of the week. I feel like it used to be like, oh, Friday is going to be the weekend. Now it's like Friday and tomorrow's still going to be work because he's just constantly keeping us busy. But I love him so much. I can't wait to, wrap up here and go hang out with my son.
Nice, man. So you haven't got that Friday feeling as such, but you're raring for the weekend.
It's a different Friday feeling. I find myself excited for Mondays in a weird way because I get to interact with adults and have conversations about real things, not just like what the cow says and what color the chicken is. But those are fun conversations too.
Mate, that's awesome. So whereabouts are you in the world right now?
So I'm in San Francisco, California. We are, if you're familiar with San Francisco, we're in a neighborhood called SoMa, which stands for South of Market. It's kind of a former industrial district that's having I don't want to say renaissance. It's still kind of a weird part of the city, but a lot of companies are buying bigger buildings here and making it kind of their HQ. So we're in a little nook with Pinterest is here. There's a self-driving car startup that's kind of getting pretty big out here. Zynga, the former gaming empire, now a little bit smaller, is right around the corner. So it's a cool little tech hub.
So that sounds like the place to be for all things, tech and
all
stuff
things
like that.
Except walking to a good restaurant. There's not a lot of that around here, but they take good care of us here, and I haven't really left the building in an embarrassingly long time. So it's not bad.
That's awesome. I was speaking to someone the other week and they were telling me about San Francisco and what it was like there. And I was a little bit embarrassed to tell them where I'm from. But I'm from the southwest of England.
Okay.
And it's pretty basic. The weather's pretty standard. It's fairly small. It's a fairly small area. But I would love to head out to San Francisco. It's definitely on my bucket list.
Sure. It's one of those cities that has so much to offer, and it just, no matter what you're looking for, if you're somebody who's looking for architecture, there's these Victorian homes here that were built around 1890, 1910 that are just jaw-dropping. And then there's the natural landscape. The city's full of hills and it's surrounded by the ocean. And it just has, whether you're a nature lover or a food lover, or there's so many dogs. If you're a dog lover, it's a great city to visit. It's such a cool place to be. And I'm just really lucky that I ended up here.
How long have you been in San Francisco then?
So I have been out here since 2009, so about 10 years. My wife is born and raised in San Francisco, and we met in college. So when we graduated, it was this question of, do we stay in Pennsylvania, where I'm from, or do we go out to California? Either way, we were going to live with our parents until we found jobs and made it work. And we just decided San Francisco seemed like a smarter destination for us, and been out here ever since.
I would love to live in the States. That's definitely one of my dreams. I feel it's everyone's dream in the UK is to move to America and live that American dream and really make it happen and go for it. It's the land of opportunity. I'm glad to hear that. I mean, just the past couple of years since the last election have been tough to be an American when you talk abroad. I mean, politically, there's a lot going on in a lot of places right now. And, I don't need to get deep into politics, but just radical politics, I feel like are never good. And so we are in this
big surge of a radical political movement right now, and it's not one that I am a big fan of. That'll be like the end of my political contribution to this conversation, but I do have this weird awareness now when I travel. I feel like everybody looks at you and is laughing a little bit and just or in shock of what's happening. And um, I'm I'm glad that there's still this perception of the states being a place for creative opportunity and personal and still political freedom. I mean, it's not horrible. I don't feel the sense of like impending doom every day, but many days I do.
So when's the next general election then? How
It'll
often does that happen?
2020. So it's every 4 years. And the last one was 2016. So they'll start to do the big push for their candidacy. And they haven't announced even if Trump is going to run again. Probably, I'm guessing. I think the fear is he'll claim that the election is rigged, and who knows. But they start that big push for their campaign usually this year, towards the end of the year.
Yeah, the UK is a bit of a shitstorm at the minute.
It is.
There's a lot going on as well. To be fair, I'm not fully clued up on politics. I'm not exactly 100% sure what's going on. I'm just smiling and nodding and agreeing. And,
yeah.
It's kind of like it's kind of a negative way to look at it, but it's like, what's the kind of the point in having an opinion when your opinion isn't valued and it's not listened to, and it doesn't get acted upon, and it's just like, why am I even bothering? So it's just, I don't know.
It's really hard because some people look at that and they're like, well, you're being apathetic. And I feel like there's also this element of, even if you try to get engaged, you don't know what's true anymore. And I don't mean that from this place of like pure, I don't know, tinfoil hat, like conspiracy theory. I mean, like, you look at the news and you read something and it's not a firsthand account of yours. So it's been distilled, and probably, that game of telephone has been played a few times. And unless you are somebody who can dedicate, hours out of your day to looking at that perspective from a handful of different news sources, from trying to get as close as possible, it's really hard to form an opinion that you can act on. And when people do that and they see messages on Facebook, or, whether it's a bot or a friend sharing an opinion, and they become more polarized from that, it's scary. And so I'm really hyper aware of that. And that, I think, is why I'm kind of paralyzed when it comes to a lot of political things. I just am like, well, I've never met them. I don't know them. The media makes them seem horrible, but they're a human being. So I don't think that any of us are like these, TV villains or movie villains where we're just like, I'm bad. I'm my only one to destroy. Everybody thinks they're doing good. And I think that they think they're doing good. And, I think if you were to have dinner with them, you'd find something redeeming. Doesn't mean their acts are worthwhile or not, but it makes it hard to have a strong political opinion when you don't trust things like that.
I'm getting more and more letters through the door saying, make sure you vote next, make sure you vote next, make sure you vote next. It's so pushy.
Yeah.
And I think they're recognizing that people don't have enough trust in the system anymore, and they're sort of losing faith in, everything, and they're just trying to be a bit pushy. I could talk about that for hours. I really could. Even though I know nothing about politics, I kind of feel like I have a strong opinion about it.
Yeah.
But not so much like, oh, you should vote for this party because they do this. I just think there's so much that I don't know. I mean, there's no point getting too involved, because you're going to be happy with some things, you're going to be unhappy with others.
I think what you just said makes a lot of sense. It's like an opinion you can learn in a couple of hours, but a perspective that takes years to gain. And so it sounds like you have a political perspective, but you're still not entirely sure of your political opinions. And I think that's healthy and normal. And I'd probably say I'm the exact same.
Yeah. But yeah, man, let's get into it. I'm recording now. Is that okay?
Sure. So I was going to ask you, like, is this the podcast? Because like we can. I mean, it can be whatever.
I mean, it records sort of automatically as soon as you get connected. If that's cool, anyway.
That's
awesome.
Fine.
I'm a super fan of not just your work, but the places that you've worked at and stuff. And I was just wondering if you could maybe tell us a bit about how you got into the industry and where you started. I've seen that
Sure.
you studied at Vassar College. Oh,
Yes,
Vassar
I
College, yeah.
did. Yeah, let me give you the whole rundown. I alluded to this earlier. I grew up in the East Coast of the States in a little town called Allentown, Pennsylvania. If you're a fan of Billy Joel, there's a Billy Joel song about it. That's about its biggest claim to fame.
I think I've heard of it.
It's
Yeah.
a suburb of Philadelphia. My dad owned a carpet store, and as exciting as the world of floor covering, as revolutionary as that may seem, my dad was the most creative and incredible guy. He was definitely my first creative mentor, still is my hero. And I think it all stemmed from the fact that he used to make all of his own commercials. So
Wow.
he was kind of a local celebrity in our very small town. And these commercials weren't just like, look at all of our carpet, it comes in red and blue. It was like him emerging, miniaturized, emerging out of the carpet and talking about its stain resistance, or him like getting into this car of the future and flying into space. Or there was a whole commercial with Muppets. I mean, he he was really a creative dude who found this outlet despite being in a bit of a mundane. I guess I shouldn't say that if he listens to this, but in a little bit of a less creative industry. And so I always grew up with a camera in my hands, would steal my dad's like little VHS camera when we would go to Disneyland and make my own really weird films. And that kind of, it was at a time where YouTube wasn't around yet. And so we were recording onto, DV and editing, like, I don't even know what software we were using at the time, maybe Vegas or something that I probably stole. And they wouldn't go anywhere, but I was really, really proud of them. And when I went to college, I just never really considered film. I was looking for a liberal arts school. I wanted to study economics and philosophy. And so Vassar, if you're familiar, it's a small school in Poughkeepsie, New York. It's about an hour and a half train ride on the Metro North from the city, which was huge for me. Like, I love New York City. I like being able to get there, but I didn't really like the vibe of like spending all my time there. So Vassar's in the Hudson Valley, this gorgeous school. And I had a great freshman year. I was going to declare a major in econ and probably take over the carpet store. And sophomore year, I got really just kind of burned out. I don't know if it was passion or what it was. I wasn't feeling it. I almost dropped out. And at the time, I was also just, I was not dating. I mean, it was college. So I was hanging out a lot with this woman. Her name was Jill, and she convinced me to, or encouraged me to take a film class that she was in. And I was pretty ignorant. Like, I didn't know if they offered a film major. I knew they had a film building. I just was kind of so closed off to it. And when I realized that, you could study film, I don't know. I don't know if it's naive to say that, but I didn't know you could study it and people were taken as seriously as philosophy. Like, here's, someone studying like documentary film and the Maisels brothers in one room, and then in another building, they're studying like Aristotle and Socrates, and
Hmm.
they're holding them to the same, creative standards. I think that was new to me. And so I fell in love with that. I think that that was a big turning point for me. Maybe a month later, I declared a film major, and all of a sudden, I was doing what I absolutely love to do every day, and that was studying film theory. That led into film production, both documentary and narrative, and produced a couple films at school. It was incredible. Had an opportunity to work with some amazing and very talented people who have now gone on to have careers down in Hollywood and in New York.
Wow.
And then I graduated in 2009, which was just an economic clusterfuck in the United States. Am I able to say that on this show?
Yes,
Uh,
absolutely. Absolutely. You just did.
it was a really rough time to graduate. There weren't very many jobs. There was a housing crisis happening. And so again, earlier I alluded to this moment in time where no matter what decision I made, I was going to end up living with my parents or my, at the time, girlfriend's parents. Same girl, by the way, that convinced me to study film. We stayed together in school, and she was from San Francisco. So we were like, let's go there. That seems like the place to go. This is a really long roundabout way of getting to my first kind of career pillar.
No, this is awesome. This is great. You know, as you're talking, I'm almost picturing like a film. You could definitely make a film from this.
You know,
Like I might even just take this snippet, put some inspirational music over it, and just make a trailer from it.
hey,
It sounds great.
I'll
Honest to
sell
God,
those rights to you. That's fine.
sounds good.
I
Carry on.
think so. We drove across the country, which was incredible. I feel like we spent about 3 weeks slowly driving from Pennsylvania out to San Francisco. We took the northern route through states that I, had only ever seen on a map in geography class, like South Dakota, which are interesting. Each one has its own distinct type of beauty. There's this national park in South Dakota called the Badlands, and it's just gorgeous. And what was really interesting was I was seeing these sets and settings for films that I'd watched my whole life, and it was like in the moment, like physically there. There's this scene in Forrest Gump, the scene where he's running and running and running and finally stops running. And he's got this big beard and everybody else just stops like 20 yards behind him. And he's like, I forget the exact line, but he just decides that he's done. And we went there, like we were there. I have a picture of me on that road jumping in
Wow.
the air. And so we kind of lived this like cinematic dream driving across the country. Um, and then we lived in her parents' back room. She has a younger brother and sister, so I would be woken up every day about 6. They ran a summer camp, or the summer camp met at their house. So we were trying very hard to get out of there. I was interviewing at like coffee shops and restaurants, and finally I got a job at Apple, the Apple store, Apple retail store. And so that is in downtown San Francisco. It's one of their flagship stores, which means not only was it very big, but they did a lot more than just sell computers. They had a theater upstairs, and they would have seminars and workshops. That's something that they've brought to a lot of the small stores now. But back then, it was one of the only places you could go to learn like Final Cut for free from an Apple certified, creative, I think they called them. So started in sales. It was pretty easy. I'd worked at the carpet store, so I could sell Apple Care like nobody's business. Uh,
Nice.
but I didn't really, again, I had studied film and I was like not really using it. I wasn't making a ton of money, and it didn't feel like a career. But one day the guy who did the theater workshops, I think he was sick, and they needed somebody to come in and teach Final Cut Pro for about 2 hours. And I had done some theater stuff in high school and was like, I'll try it. I know Final Cut. And I did this workshop, and honestly, it was a really big hit. I mean, I felt like I did a good job. The audience, they'll have to give, Apple does this like scorecard afterwards. They email you. They say, how was Elliot? How was the workshop?
Okay.
And so I did well. I scored highly. And next thing I knew, I was teaching 7 to 8 of those workshops a day. So like 8 or 9 hours
Wow.
up there. And it transitioned from teaching them to writing them. And I would say the highlight of my career, I was there for the launch of iPhone 3GS, for iPhone 4, and for the iPad. And the day that the iPad launched, they don't let anybody touch it, right? Until about 1 a.m. The whole store is transformed. And I get there like super early, see an iPad, and I have to deliver a workshop called Getting Started with iPad. I hadn't touched one, they're intuitive, but like it was a pretty scary thing. And not only that, Steve was alive at the time still, and he could have come to the store at any minute. He'd just kind of pop in randomly, which was terrifying. You weren't allowed to talk to him. You had to just treat him like a customer. So I'm 9 a.m, I think, maybe 10. The store opens, and one of the very first workshops is me teaching Getting Started with iPad. And there in the front row of this workshop isn't Steve, but is Jony Ive. And
isn't that the product designer?
The product designer, the guy who is in every single video just pontificating about the simplicity and the beauty, and I am freaking out, not just because I look up to him, but because if I get anything wrong, like here's the guy that made it. And it was a whirlwind. It was absolute insanity. And afterwards, he came up and shook my hand and told me that I did a great job. And that was the beginning of me like formally doing that for a little while. And it was That was probably, I've done a lot. That was 10 years ago, but that's one of the highlights of my career. It's really small and it's really personal. No one really saw that. Nobody else was impacted by that, but for me, it gave me the confidence and the boost that I needed to really trust and believe in myself for what I was doing, and that was huge.
That's awesome, man. I mean, yeah, just getting the thumbs up from a guy like that
Sure.
is awesome. I can't imagine how you were feeling at the time, like pressure, and you want to please him, but at the same time you're just like you're watching what you say and watching what you do. Yeah, man, fair play. That must have took some doing.
You
Yeah.
wanted to forget he was there, but you couldn't forget because I mean he's someone. It's like when a celebrity walks in the room and all of a sudden,
Mm.
this might have happened to me 3 or 4 times in life. Airbnb does every now and then has somebody come in for an office tour, or we're partnering with somebody, and I was in the same room as Lady Gaga, and I at the time I was not a huge Lady Gaga fan. I knew all of her music, but my heart was just thumping. Like you when you get a chance to open your mouth, the stupidest things come out just because you're so hyper aware. Uh, and I'm glad that it wasn't now because I've become a really big Lady Gaga fan. I mean, she's super talented and she's a great actress and her voice is just phenomenal. And if I met her now, I would have been way more nervous than back then. But there was that dynamic with Johnny. It was like I remember, feeling my heartbeat in like parts of my body that I've never felt my heartbeat before.
Wow.
So I would say from there, Apple retail was kind of this weird beast where people would move occasionally to corporate, to Cupertino, and we're physically close enough that I thought I had a chance at doing that. And there was a couple of opportunities to design Marcom, marketing communications content for stores that would be the flagships. So my presentations were going out to, 7 or 8 other stores that had theaters, but it was never really formalized to the point where, I had a Cupertino badge and I was down there and working in the cool office and one infinite loop. And that was kind of bumming me out because I was doing a lot of that work, but I wasn't really getting some of the other benefits of like a full-time salary. And, there's still a big division between Apple Store and Apple Corporate. And one day I was introduced to this really interesting creative dude named Troy Young. It was through a mutual friend. And this was, again, kind of at this time at Apple where I was open to other opportunities, but I wasn't really ready to jump yet. Troy, he was somebody who in first conversation, you're just like captivated. It's his voice, it's his persona, it's his way of thinking about the world. You kind of hang on every word he says. And at the time, he was working at this company, I think it was the president, called Video Egg. Video Egg was a company that pioneered everybody's favorite thing, video pre-roll ads, which are the pop-ups that show up before you watch a video on YouTube. So you have Troy Young to thank for that.
Nice.
He was merging that company with this blogging platform called 6apart. And 6apart is the company that created TypePad, which was a very, very early place for people to blog and have journals and just, host their own sites, whether they were just for passion, professional, whatever. And the goal was to form a modern media company. So a place where advertisers and influencers could connect and create content that was mutually beneficial. Sounded pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And I joined that company on day one. I joined as a video producer and I worked directly with Troy. In the beginning, it was I was like going to parties and just filming and making things to show how cool a hip of a company we were. And I was on our marketing team. So I had a couple of interesting like behind the scenes films that I was able to make. It was the first time I was really utilizing, my chops in editing and cinematography and storytelling. But it wasn't until about a year in that they started to take video very seriously. But we used to have these internal all hands meetings there, and we came up with this idea to film a short about just random employees. We would just kind of select an employee and partner with them for a day to make a mini documentary, and we called the series Passions. And The first one that I made, it followed this woman, Janine, who was just a dog lover. And when I say that, I mean, it's not like she like had a dog that she liked. Everything in her world was dogs. Like you go in her house, like her bed sheets, her shower curtain, she has dog tattoos. She is like a dog obsessed in
Wow.
a healthy way. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
we made this film, and the way that she talked about dogs and how, she was never going to have kids, but how a dog was like this interesting proxy. And I don't know, it made some people cry. It was the first thing I made really that had that impact on me and some others. And it planted this seed for, I guess, a couple folks in the sales team that like, we could sell this. We could sell this and partner someone like Janine with a brand like Iams, which is a pet food company in the States, and find this mutual place. And so I started to work on a team that was creating what we called advertorial content. And this is, you've probably read a magazine where you're skimming through Wired and you turn a page, and on black text at the top, it says advertisement, and the layout doesn't really look as good. And you read it and you get halfway through and you're like, well, this is a waste of my time. This is for Tide Pods or something.
Absolutely.
We were making the video equivalent of that.
Okay, okay, I'm with you.
And now I tried to put a lot of soul into it. I did that for about a year and a half. I loved it. But after doing that, we did it for Intel and Tom's Miracle Grow and, brands big and small. I did feel a little bit like I was kind of selling my soul, which I'm probably being a little too much of a diva when I say that. Advertising, there's good and bad advertising, and Say Media and what they were trying to do falls definitely on the spectrum of good advertising. They were really trying to make content that people cared about. But again, I was just in this place where I wanted to do a little bit more. So I decided to start my own company where I was able to be a little bit more selective around clients. A lot of our stuff was similar. So a lot of short form video, 3 to 5 minutes, that was personality driven and connected to a brand. But I did a lot of work for nonprofits and just told stories that I thought were important to tell. And this was the fucking perfect time to do this. I mean, this is 2012, like digital SLRs are just getting to be affordable. Editing software like Final Cut was on the App Store for $2.99. You could make a film that looked like it was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you made it for nothing. I mean, if you owned your own camera and you bought or stole editing software, your cost of production, if you know how to harness natural light and you know how to shoot, it's next to nothing. And so we were making, I had a business partner at the time, and together we were just making these films for brands large and small. And I'm not going to say we were raking it in. Like, I didn't really know how to sell at that time, but we would sell a campaign and we would bring some people on to help. But it was so much fun, and didn't feel like a job, but I was making enough to get by. And it's really just this point in time that we're at. I mean, we're still there. It's just more people know now. You had these brands and they were used to spending so much money and getting something back that looked mediocre. And now they're spending like less money and getting something back that looked like a film. I think it's like the revolution of shooting at 24 frames per second. And again, like the ability to put that on your website and have it front and center and full screen, that was so new to these companies that were used to buying television spots. And I'm so lucky to have been born and graduate and like come into my element at this exact moment in time.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's so cool. And it's awesome that you found it at the right time as well, and you grabbed that opportunity and you recognized it and you ran with it, because I think that's what a lot of decent business-minded people do. You can see it at the minute. It's I don't want to say the industry is sort of diluted, but the chance to grab that opportunity isn't as good as it was back then. And I mean, it's so disruptive to the traditional sort of industry, like for cinematography or for film and stuff, for this new wave of technology to come along and make it easy for everyone. It's kind of flipped the industry on its head a little bit, and it's made these guys who have been in the industry for 20 plus years sort of start scratching their head and think, oh shit, we need to start doing things a little bit differently around here. These things are changing. We need to get with the times a little bit.
Absolutely. I feel like the opportunities now are still there, but you have to look for them in different ways. And I'm always trying to think about what's the next window like that. So, now that you have an incredibly powerful camera in your pocket all the time on your iPhone, that opportunity to like impress people with quick film is changing. So you look at what other mediums, what other storytellers are just coming into their element, and what brands are still kind of afraid to dip their toes in that water. And I look at things like Twitch and game streaming and people like Ninja who are making $1 million doing these things. And I was just watching a Ninja stream last night, and he's got ads now for like Red Bull and Uber and brands that are finally starting to engage. And it
Yeah.
reminded me so much of the early days at Video Egg. These horrible pop-up ads that are just doing nothing but destroying your experience. And so I do see opportunities there to change that, and to again find this nice balance of personality and advertising that's kind of a win-win. And that's just one area. I mean, I thought for a long time like VR was another area where there's a lot of potential, because the means of creating VR seems so impossible. I mean, when you think about putting on a headset, it's just a whole other world of technical challenges. But then, Final Cut, now you can edit in 360, same thing in Premiere. There's a lot of cameras and a lot of plugins for things like After Effects that will allow you to edit in 360 and do really powerful creative work. So I think there's different frontiers, but you're totally right. I mean, the film thing is, YouTube is too big to think that that's a new thing for brands anymore. They're finally figuring it out, and figuring it out in ways that I never even thought of. So people have way surpassed my conceptual ability.
Yeah, totally, man. I'm the same. I'm always looking for sort of opportunities and sort of gaps, uh, I guess it's about, yeah, like I said, trying to catch it at the right time. And I remember I was saying this to a guy in another podcast about I was looking at meme pages years ago when they first started coming out, and I knew I wanted to grow an Instagram channel, but I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I didn't know why I wanted to do it. And I thought, I think I was curious more than anything, because I sort of work in social media and create content for it. So I wanted to see how easy it was or how difficult it was to grow that channel, and what you needed to do to stay current and reach the right people and tailor content differently for different channels and such. And yeah, I think I was I think I wanted that journey. And so, yeah, I started looking at meme pages, but at the time I was kind of like, oh, I can't be asked. There's so many out there. The market's saturated as hell. There's no way that you're gonna get anywhere, because fuck Jerry was on the scene, and he was posting God knows how much. And so I just give up. And then and this was about 3 years ago maybe, and no, I was speaking to a friend the other week, and we were saying that if we'd stuck with it, and if we had, were persistent and consistent with our content, we could have a decent following. Whether we were doing it for the right reasons or whether I wanted it to do it for the right reasons is a totally different question. But just out of curiosity to see whether it would grow. But yeah, I think there's opportunities opening up all the time. I think podcasts is huge, to be honest.
Yeah, there's a podcast workshop that I taught at Apple,
Wow.
2010 maybe, because it was a GarageBand thing, and they've been pushing it a long time. I mean, when you open up GarageBand, one of the first templates that you can choose from is a podcast. And at the time, no one really knew what to do with that, how to use it. And the top 10 podcasts back then, I think, This American Life was always up there, and Radio Lab, and these very heavily produced, there's a whole team behind them. They're basically auditory films, right? There's a ton of
Yeah.
production value. But the podcasts that I find myself listening to the most are conversational, and they have this element of authenticity, and I'm joining them because of the personality or the educational opportunity or the humor, more so than the production value. I mean, I still love a great story, and Serial, This American Life, those podcasts are incredible. But there's one that is probably my most played podcast. It's Doug Benson's podcast called Doug Loves Movies, and
Okay.
it's a comedy show that it started out I don't know what came first, the show or the podcast, but it's the show is the podcast and the podcast is a show. And he gets a couple of comedian friends together and they play games centered around films. And there's a
Ah,
huge
okay.
community to it. People show up and they wear shirts and bring signs, and it's just really silly. It's fun. The production value is nothing special, but it's one that I keep coming back to because I learned something, but I never feel like I'm learning. And I love that dynamic to it.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like you need to put. Well, I mean, you definitely need to consider content across different channels and stuff like that. But it's almost like you don't need to make content polished as such. I see a lot of content Gary Vee puts out. I don't know if you've heard of Gary Vee Vaynerchuk, and he puts out content like a ridiculous amount, like 5 things maybe a day on social, and they're not really polished. They're kind of a bit raw. Um, Not so clean around the edges, things aren't really centered, things that an agency would definitely be considering. And I think it's having that quick turnaround of work and being able and having no sort of, well, I think there is an agency there, but he obviously has the final sign off, but not having that internal opinion and not having to go through different people and such. And it just makes creating a business easier, I guess, if you've got that much more control
Sure.
at the tip of your fingers.
Well, again, look
Yeah.
at something like Twitch. I mean, most of the top streams are not polished at all. If you look through, I'm kind of studying Twitch right now. I love to play games. I was never into the world of online games. So my ideal game is something like Mario, where you're either a platforming, you
Yes.
have like this storytelling, level design, beauty, but I never got into like the Warcraft thing or Starcraft thing, never really got into the Call of Duty thing. And that's a lot of what's popular on Twitch. But what's interesting is there's also just the Let's Chat channels or the channels where it's somebody cooking or learning
Yeah.
like a song on piano. And the production value, like just being honest, the design is the worst. I mean, the chat scrolls way too fast for you to read, and sometimes they just scream and the microphone's constantly peaking. But there's thousands and thousands and thousands of people not just watching it, but engaging with it. That's what
Yeah. Yeah.
every brand wishes they had. And I don't think it's what any brand would actually make because they would be too scared to do that. So that's what I'm trying to study and figure out. And not on behalf of Airbnb, just me, just trying
Yeah.
to
Yeah. Of
understand
course.
what that is so that I can, again, put myself in that mindset of what's next and how can we, think about using something like that.
Yeah, I really like Twitch. Twitch is an interesting one. I went through a stage a while back where I was watching it. I find it easier to watch games than play games, but if I am playing it, I'm definitely a Nintendo fan. I'm one of the fans of like Zelda,
Oh, huge.
The Ocarina of Time. Oh man.
We could just talk about that. I mean, that might
Oh
be a
man,
separate
easily.
podcast.
Easily, yeah, mate. But Mario 64 on the Nintendo, and I had Mario. Was Odyssey the latest one on the
Odyssey, yeah.
Switch?
Yeah.
Yeah, I had that, and then I ended up selling the Switch as soon as I played Zelda and Mario. But yeah, I'm really interested in Switch, and it's one of those where like YouTube's recognized how big it's got, and it's jumped on the gaming scene, and I guess they're just trying to cover as much as of the spectrum as possible. So YouTube are obviously trying to make things a lot more social, like Facebook now, because they know there's opportunity in that social experience. And Facebook obviously know there's an opportunity in video. That's why they're creating Facebook Watch. So they've all got eyes on each other. They know what they're doing, and they're just trying to broaden their services, I guess, as much as possible.
Yeah, we were saying like the opportunity feels like it's gone, but then you do look at things like Instagram TV and like you said, the Facebook Watch stuff. It's just a different type of opportunity out there because that stuff did not exist when I was in the world of selling video. That was not even a thought, and I don't know. I'm so far from removed from that now. So my day to day these days is quite a bit different, and I just realized we hadn't even really gotten to that.
I was
part
going
of
to
the
get to that.
story.
Sorry, yeah,
So yeah, my
absolutely,
story
man.
kind of ended about maybe 2/3 of the way through, so I'll finish that up. But yeah,
Yeah,
it
go
took
for
a
it,
little
man.
bit of a transition, and I'm a little bit distanced from that video world now. So looking at what people are doing on those channels, it's inspiring, and in a way, it's like, I don't know how to say this the right way. It's a little disheartening because, I studied film and I shot film on 16 millimeter. And I feel like I had this really interesting type of experience and discipline that comes with that. And now, I don't want to sound old or like a curmudgeon. Like these days, the kids don't know. But
I know exactly where you're coming
but
from.
a
I
lot
know
of the
exactly
type
where you're
of
coming
content,
from.
it breaks the rules that I had to study. And that's a good thing. I mean, I think, rules are rules. They have a reason that they were made. There's a reason that they should evolve. I think one of the best film professors that I had, one of his key takeaways was like, you have to know the rules so that you know how to break the rules, right? And that's something that a lot of filmmakers like Tarantino will do all the time. Like there's this rule in film, the 180-degree rule, which is basically how you shoot a conversation to feel like it's two people looking at each other. And it's just this line that you draw, and you have to keep the camera on one side of that 180-degree line between characters. Because if you break that,
Ah,
all of a sudden it looks like, instead of looking to the right and having the conversation, he's looking at somebody off to the left, and it breaks the eye line and you feel really weird.
I see.
So it's this rule that unless you study film, you never notice it, but when it's broken, you feel it. And an amateur like student filmmaker who doesn't know that, that's one of the qualities of those films. You kind of watch it and you're like, "Oh, good job, Timmy, you made a movie." But Tarantino, when he breaks that rule, he does it with intention because he knows the rule really well, and he breaks it to create the sense of discomfort in the audience. And so, there's that type of rule breaking that's like kind of artistic and done with intention and higher purpose. And then there's this other kind of rule breaking that was really common when like Vine was around, which was like, I know the rules, but I just don't care because it's funny. Or like, I don't have the time to give a shit about the rules because I have your attention for about 11 seconds. And I think that that's what videos are optimizing for on a lot of these platforms. And that's kind of, like I said, I'm a little distanced from that. So I don't have the best practices for that down. Um,
No, I'm fully on board with what you're saying. And as a designer, it is quite disheartening, isn't it? When you've sort of you've been in the game for a while and you've learned the things that you have organically, and there's a lot of platforms at the minute. There's one called Fiverr.com where you can ask someone for a logo and
mhm.
they'll do it for a fiver, and it's kind of like you say, you don't want to sound old or anything, but it's kind of like, oh, you're taking everything I've worked for, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And it's kind of sad, but in a way, it's the way things are going. And I guess you've just got to accept it and get on with it and get used to it.
You got to work within
I
it. You got to
guess.
leverage it when it makes sense. And I'm familiar with Fiverr. I think any logo that you got back from there would be passable for a certain type of person. And then there's these kind of like great minds that you work for. Like I mentioned, Troy. He would be able to look at that and just immediately know that there wasn't enough time, attention, and passion behind it. Um, to round out the story about Troy, Troy now is the president, I think, I don't know his exact title, of Hearst Publishing. So the biggest
Wow.
publishing company, I should say one of, in the
Yeah,
States. And
yeah.
I mean, they have a global presence now. So he was someone who I got to know really, really well. And now, I mean, I see him maybe once or twice a year, but he's just a whole other category of human being now in this role where
Wow.
he is just influencing and having his hands in media of all forms. He ran their digital arm for a little while, and now he runs everything.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
So
weird.
if you ever need a book published, you know who to go
I
to.
think so. Book, magazine, anything. Yeah, I know who to go to first, but I mean, like I said, that would be like bringing him a Fiverr logo. He'd see my book and be like, I don't think so.
Yeah, I had an experience once with Fiverr. This guy came messaged me and was like, "Oh, I want a logo." I was like, "Yeah, okay. What's your budget?" Sort of thing. And he told me what he had, and I was kind of like, it's not worth the time. I can't remember what I said to him, but I remember he posted something on Facebook a few weeks later, uh, and he credited Fiverr, and he said, "Oh, big thanks to," I'll say his name's Tom. Big thanks to Tom for giving us the heads up about Fiverr.com. This is the logo I've just had made for me, and it was terrible. It was disgusting, and I'm not sure whether because I'm a designer and I'm familiar with seeing loads of different logos and paying proper attention to them, but it was dog shit. To the untrained eye, it probably doesn't look any different than it would do to the average Joe, I guess.
Sure.
But it's yeah, like you say, it's disheartening. Sorry, I keep interrupting
No,
you.
hey,
You,
that's
you,
okay.
you have
I feel like I'm also just telling my life story, which is, I guess, half of what this is about. But I think only
yeah,
a
man,
certain
absolutely.
person will be on board. Where was I? So I had started my own business. I was working with a business partner, and things were going really well. We had clients like YouTube and Bayer, who makes aspirin, and like things large and small. Um, at the time, I had married, or I was engaged at the beginning and married, who's now my wife, Jillian, the same woman that I met sophomore year of school.
Wow, that's
And
cool.
yeah, I mean, how different this entire story would have been if I hadn't met her. Honestly, it's scary to think about that, because she's just paramount for so many things. I mean, not just like personal happiness and my life, my family, my son, but just like decisions and creative support and encouragement. And she was the person who, through a second cousin of hers, connected me to Troy. So like opportunity
Wow.
and things like that. And so I have this tension at that time between wanting to start a family and the fears of being a freelancer. And, we were in Oakland. We'd moved from San Francisco over to Oakland. We were renting, but we were seeing home prices just skyrocket. So in 2012, a home in Oakland would be about $300,000. Um,
Right.
I'm trying to do the currency translation for you, and I can't, because I don't know what you're at right now.
Neither do
Things go
I.
up and down.
No.
But so it was a lot of money. It was about 100,000, or maybe 20% more than the same house would have been where I grew up in Pennsylvania. But it wasn't so much money that you'd have to eat ramen noodles all the time. And so we
Yeah,
knew
yeah.
we wanted to buy a home and just stop paying rent and be able to paint the walls and do stuff like that. But the thought of uh, a mortgage and starting a family on freelance income was terrifying, because some months I would make a lot of money, and some months and for some stretches I wouldn't make any money. And when you're renting, you are not only paying less, but you kind of have a little bit of a safety net, where like you could miss a month of rent and not like
Yeah.
have a bank knocking on your door.
Yeah.
And so, especially with a kid, you can't miss like a month of diapers. That doesn't work. And so I
Unless you got plenty of towels.
towels, or you're really good at like recognizing it and running to the toilet. Um, and so I just kind of casually started looking on LinkedIn and opening myself up to conversations about roles. And I felt really conflicted, because my business partner was one of my best friends, and it was hard to look at how that relationship would change. But it was, there was a bigger picture in mind here. And Airbnb was a company that I'd always looked up to, and design wise, I just thought the work that they were creating, both graphically and then design, like product on the product side, was incredible. They produced amazing films. Their sense of photography, their graphic design, their perspective on the industry, their mission. And another friend of mine from Say, his name is Alex Schleifer. He was my manager at Say for a little bit. He was at an agency that Say Media acquired during my time there. Had just become the VP of all design at Airbnb. And so
Oof.
again, these weird connections. Um, I I saw this post for a presentation designer. And it was the first thing that I'd seen, because they were hiring a lot of engineers and a lot of recruiters. And I am neither an engineer nor a recruiter, although I thought maybe I could be a recruiter if I needed to. This post was the first one, and I would say about 50% of the requirements I met really well, and 50% I just were not part of my experience. I
Yeah.
had used Keynote and I'd made presentations at Apple, and then spent the bulk of my career at that time doing film. And when I was freelancing, I would make pitch decks. So I kind of knew my way around Keynote, but I didn't have any professional experience like with these really gigantic screen keynotes aside from the one I made for Jony Ive. And believe me, that was in my interview deck that I gave at Airbnb. Pretty much the exact story that I told you, I told them.
Nice.
And
Sold.
they were really looking for a storyteller. And I think that's what that their posting really missed was like the presentation design, the actual like keynote, slide design and animations. That's really easy. Anybody can learn that. Apple's designed a really great program, but it's what goes on the slides, how it interacts with what a speaker says. I mean, you're both making a film and a live theatrical production at the same time. And so you have to really have this ability to understand an audience, understand brand messaging, understand how to create tension and resolution and narrative arcs. And I really sold them on that. And I was like, whatever I don't
Nice.
know in Keynote, I will learn and I'll be very fast. And so they took a chance, and I joined Airbnb in 2015, 4 years ago. There was about 1,000 people and a few small offices. Now we're 6,000 and some people. We have offices
Wow.
all over. I don't know the exact number. I think there's 20 offices. It's huge everywhere. And my job started as just a kind of hodgepodge team. We have an internal art department here. The art department is made up of illustrators, animators, photographers, and these are people that do a lot of the media that you see both in our product and in print out in the real world. We still partner with bigger agencies for like global productions or for a gigantic campaign, but the art department is kind of an in-house agency.
Cool.
And slowly my time on the art department just evolved to have a bigger and bigger impact. And my team, which was just one other person and myself, moved into the product org just so that we could be closer to the way that the product was evolving. And I found myself working with Brian Chesky, who's our CEO, on the regular. And so being close to him and kind of able to tap into what he was working on next became just paramount to my success in my role. And so rather than we were doing board meetings and investor decks and these big all hands presentations, but we started to do these really fun, I call them secret projects, because Brian would get really excited about something and then he would task us with just exploring them. And this was in any medium that we could. Sometimes I would make films. Sometimes we would make a keynote that we like exported as a GIF, just kind of hacking whatever we could to make a proof of concept. And one that I can share with you was for Airbnb Experiences, which now is something that's real and on the platform. But back then it was
Yeah.
just this idea of like, if we did more than a home, what could that look like? What does good travel look like? What does bad travel look like? And so we just kind of did a little sprint. And this was me and my coworker. His name's Lee J, incredibly talented visual designer and animator. And, Brian would always have kind of pockets of other people working on the same things, and he would never tell them. And so he'd have these like 4 or 5 different perspectives come together. So I'm in no way taking credit for the product, but we were kind of one little work stream that became kind of paramount to what ended up launching a year and a half or so later. And so our team has this really cool opportunity to work on these little mini projects, which is a design exercise in the biggest sense of the word. Not just design like what you see, but how you experience it, how it fits into the business, how it's a manifestation of the brand and the mission, and how it's designed to foster belonging and trust between strangers, which is the biggest goal at Airbnb. And then when it actually launches, I'm also the guy that's making the keynote and
Slide deck.
the you say slide deck, but that thing ends up being, there's film and animation and a lot of just different components that are kind of woven together to create, like I describe it as more of a theatrical show.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I am responsible for that as like 50-60% of my job are those big launches and kind of these big, anytime there's a leader and there's a screen behind them, it goes through our team. And then the rest of my job is kind of exploring the future of what our offering could look like. And so a little peek behind the curtain, we started out as a homes business. We were just a business where you could stay in someone else's couch or house. And our goal is to really think about how do we fit into the entire travel journey? So how do we help people feel belonging when they walk out the door? And that was where experiences came from. So how can you really connect and do what a local might do, or have an experience that's not just riding on the big bus? You're not gonna really explore London in a powerful, meaningful, transformational way on the second story of that bus, right? You
Yeah.
you want to get into a neighborhood and explore like a local artist scene or follow a craft beer scene.
Yeah.
Um, and now we're thinking beyond that. How do you get there? What's that like? What would the flight experience be like if you were on an Airbnb plane? What would that look like? What would have inspired you to travel in the first place? How do you choose where you're going to go? And it's not just like an Airbnb travel guide. It's bigger than that. And so our team has these little pops of fun exploring each one of those areas on a trip.
I mean, I've been a fan of Airbnb for years now, and it's been awesome to see it sort of grow and evolve as a brand. I remember seeing a picture of the old office, and there was around about 8 or 9 guys in there, and they had that picture next to the main HQ that they've got at the minute, and it's just insane, really, to see how quickly it's blown up as well. Yeah, I mean, I'm a massive fan, and I seen a TED talk with is it Joe Gebbia
Gebbia,
or Gebbia?
yep.
Gebbia. So he's a co-founder of Airbnb as well.
Yeah.
I think it was called How Airbnb Designs for Trust, which I'm guessing you were behind as well.
Yes, yeah, that was
Yeah,
wow, that was about a year in to my time here. And again, going from somebody who had never really made a presentation to partnering with one of the co-founders to design a TED Talk was just a
insane.
very insane experience. The challenge with that TED Talk was that it was given by Joe and not by Joe on behalf of Airbnb. So Ted wanted to hear from him and his perspective as just an individual, as a designer, as a leader, but not necessarily, you know, Joe speaking as his role. I think at the time he was CPO. He kind of heads now this like deep future division of Airbnb, but they didn't want him speaking on behalf of the brand, and so we were challenged by that because we have this beautiful design aesthetic and a set of fonts and colors and an array of photography at our disposal, but we had to make this feel a little bit more personal and bring the fidelity down a bit. And it was an interesting challenge. That was just me and Joe in a couple of different Airbnbs in Vancouver, building that talk over about 2 weeks and rehearsing it. He's a really interesting, infinitely creative guy who likes to explore a lot of iterations. So if you've probably experienced clients like this who want to have about 20 different versions of something to decide that the first one was the best one. And so we did that a
Yeah.
lot with that talk, and it had its moments of being really, incredibly rewarding and a little bit painful at times, but we got to be really close, and I'm super thankful for, that time. And I look at that now and I think it's a really funny talk. It also has all the elements that, as I've done this for 4 years now, I have kind of a few things that are like I don't want to say my signature, but that I try to weave into all of my talks. And
Yeah, yeah.
one is really like, it's not audience participation, but it's like active participation. And
Are you about to tell us that you were responsible for everyone getting out their phones?
that was a dynamic that I was pushing very, very hard for. So like,
Yeah.
you know, and this goes back to film, 100% back to documentary film, where you can watch a documentary by someone like Michael Moore, for example, who puts his mark on the film with his own voice and his own editing style. And really, he makes great movies, but he kind of tells you how to feel. And this also goes back to our conversation that we had about media and news and politics. You don't watch a Michael Moore film and have any question on the issue. You kind of watch and you
Yeah, yeah.
know how to feel about it. Versus you can watch another documentary and something that's a little bit more restrained with the voiceover, something that explores all sides of a subject, of a topic, and leaves you having to put those pieces together on your own. And it's the difference between active and passive watching or participation. And I always think that when you come to your own conclusion, it's a little more powerful. Um, and a TED talk is 10 minutes, so you can't really build that dynamic up. But the idea was, how do we get people to feel vulnerability? Because when you welcome a guest into your house and you're not there, you're the first time you do that, you feel very vulnerable. It's like, there's all my stuff. There's my underwear drawer. There's my stash. There's everything. And you might
Yeah,
hide it or
yeah.
lock it or do whatever, but it still has this feeling. So how, as a company, do we design around that? And to give people a sense of that feeling, we thought, what's something personal and vulnerable that they have on them? And obviously right away it was their phone. So it was like, unlock your phone. That's just like you're unlocking your front door. It was like this perfect analogy. Now hand your phone to the person to your left. And all of a sudden, like, all of the air went out of that room. It was so cool to experience because people instantly got it. And they knew, like, wow, some people found it really liberating and others were terrified. And that's exactly the type of emotion and feeling that Airbnb was up against when they were trying to do what they did back then. And so that's become like, I always try and weave something like that into the experiences that I design, because I don't want my audiences just sitting there soaking everything up and not feeling everything and, you know, being told how to feel for something. I want them to
Yeah.
arrive at that conclusion and have it be an experience that's more than just looking at a screen or listening. I want it to be active, and that was a fun way to show that.
I'm definitely going to be looking out for that from now on. It's going to happen. But I mean, it was a great talk, and I loved it. And there definitely was a turning point in the talk when people started getting out their phones, where it felt as though the atmosphere changed from that moment on till the end. It felt like a different talk. But I'm a massive fan of the journey. The backstory is super interesting. So it was Joe. He wanted to go to a design event and he didn't have enough money, so he wanted to bring people into his home so he can afford it. Charge them $20 to sit on the floor on a blow up bed.
Yep.
And I guess that's where the word air come from. Is that right?
Yeah. So the impetus was, there was a design conference coming to town. All of the hotels were sold out, and Joe and Brian, they had this apartment. Their roommate had just moved out. They were kind of struggling to make rent anyway. And as two designers, they were kind of clued into the conference. They put together this website. They said, come stay in our house, stay on our air beds. And it was originally called Airbed and Breakfast. And so that was eventually shortened down because everybody was thinking, wait, we have to sleep on airbeds when we do this? But Airbed and Breakfast was the original name of things, and then the bed got cut out, so does Airbnb. But yeah, they hosted 3 guests at their home, and those first 3 guests are still a big part of our culture today. We have portraits of them in our office the same way that Nike would have portraits of athletes in their office.
Yeah.
They are the people that we're doing this for, and really the friendship that was born between them and the first host, which just happened to be Brian and Joe, the founders, is something that still happens on the platform when you get really lucky, right? I mean, I've stayed in Airbnbs that were forgettable, that were basically hotels that, lacked personality. They lacked the presence of a human being. And that's not bad. It was efficient. But I've stayed in Airbnbs where I'm still in touch with the host today, where their story, their passion, who they were, is something that just resonated very deeply, and that in the short time that I spent in their home, I was really changed. I stayed at a cabin on the mountain between Napa and Sonoma, 2 of the wine regions in the Bay Area. I stayed at the cabin at the peak of that mountain called Mount Veeder. And this was actually the weekend before my first day at Airbnb, and this is super embarrassing. I had a profile, but I'd never stayed somewhere on my own
All
account.
right.
I'd stayed with other people, and my wife had an account, but I'd never had stayed somewhere with my own booking. And there's a whole review and trust system. So I figured, well,
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
gonna look at me and see if I've stayed somewhere. So I booked this place, and we're driving up this mountain, and the directions say when you see the green gate, make a left and pass through the row of trees and go around the pond, and you'll see the cabin like at the end of the road. And we're in the middle of nowhere, like literally on a mountain that I think it might have even been a dirt road. And we see the gate and we make a left, and we see the row of trees and we keep going, and we see the pond, and then we see this big white tent, like almost airplane hangar. And that
Right.
wasn't mentioned on the listing, and that wasn't in any of the pictures. And behind the hangar is the cabin, and it's beautiful, and it looks just like the pictures. And as we drive past it and we look at the tent and the windows are down, it's a hot day, kind of start to smell something in the air. And I look in, and there's these gigantic, beautiful, bright green plants, marijuana plants,
Nice.
huge, grow out like 99 commercial style plants.
Wow.
And I am like, what is this? Who is this person? Where are we going to get shot right now? Like, what is happening? And, the legality at the time, I don't remember exactly. Medical was definitely fine. But
Yeah.
like recreational, which is now okay in the States, was not a thing. And you just
Oh
didn't
yeah,
know.
yeah.
There were some people who were still drug dealers and had the whole air of like the gangster drug dealer vibe. And then there was also like the hippie medicinal drug dealer vibe. And we did not know what we were getting ourselves into. And then the host came out, and he was the most incredible story person that I've had a conversation with. I'm trying
Was
to
he very chilled? Had Cheetos all over his mouth.
funny that you say that. He so he used to work in the tech world, and he had grown up having this condition where he would have seizures,
Ah,
random
okay.
seizures. And
Yeah.
on 3 or 4 separate occasions, he would be on public transit and wake up in a hospital bed, and it would be days later. And, he would just not have known what happened. He would have had a seizure, nearly died. And luckily, because there are still many good people in the world, someone called the ambulance and got him to the hospital. And he had never had a way to control this, and they were getting worse. And he, was trying alternative forms of medicine, and basically found this particular type of strain. It's now gotten to be a lot more popular. It's rich in, I don't know the term, CBD, which now is like in
Oh,
drinks
okay,
and
yeah.
everything. But at the time, it was kind of unheard of, very new to me. And this thing that he was growing, it had such a low THC level that it didn't really get you high in the traditional sense, but it had the impact for him of completely stopping the seizures. He hadn't had a seizure in years and years. And he was
Wow.
making it not to smoke, but he also had in another facility this machine that would press it into a like an oil or a tincture, and he would sell that to a lot of children. I mean, not he would, but his company would
Yeah,
provide
yeah.
that as a relief for people that were that had the same affliction that he had. And so it's really funny because as prominent as that was and as crazy as that story is, the thing I remember most about him was that he brought us these 2 blueberry pies that he made from blueberries that he grew. He gave us a fruit basket and opened up the entire like plot of land to us to just go collect. He had fruit trees everywhere and strawberries and blueberries. He watched our dog the night that he went to dinner, or that we went to dinner, and said that she was welcome to stay there anytime for months at a time because he loved her so much. And he was a host in every single sense of the word. That the whole like drug dealer, fear, weed farm thing, it was like the
Yeah.
least interesting thing about him. And I could see why it wasn't on the listing. It wasn't because he was hiding it. It was because it didn't really matter at that point. And I was pretty lucky that that was my first real Airbnb experience, because I've had some bad ones. But that when you have one like that, I mean, I still talk to him. We still email regularly. There were a lot of
That's
fires that
awesome.
happened up there, and was really checking up on him. And I've seen his business grow, and the company is called Care by Design. They're growing, at least in the States, and providing that particular strain. And every now and then they'll show up in the news as like the only thing that allowed this 12-year-old girl to stop having crippling seizures. And like, I
Wow.
am so thankful that there's people like that, and that through Airbnb you get to meet them. And I never would have otherwise. Because I would have turned
That's
back. If I was driving and I saw that, I would have been out of there. I might have snapped
I
off a
would
branch and then I would have left.
I wonder at what point you would have just turned around after the white tent.
After the white tent. I don't even know if I would have made it after the lake. It could have been terrifying.
Man, yeah. I mean, that is an awesome story. I think maybe that should be written down somewhere on a plaque in the office. But
But another funny story about missing opportunities. How familiar are you in the world of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency?
oh man, I was in it. I was in it
How
about
hard were you in it?
not not fully. I didn't invest my life savings into it, but about a year ago, just before Bitcoin went mainstream, I put £100 in, and I managed to make £100 off it. Yeah, so I put £100 in. I seen it go up. I was like, it's going, and oh shit, it's going down. Quickly pull out.
Yeah.
So I made about £100, and I've only recently, within the last 4 weeks, I put another £100 into
Ooh.
Litecoin.
Oh, okay.
Into Litecoin, and I've got Coinbase on my phone, so I'm always checking, pretty much every day how the market's doing. I know nothing about diagrams and peaks and troughs and when to invest and stuff like that. What I basically do, I just look at how much is in my account, and if it goes up, then I know cryptocurrency is doing well, and if it's going down, I know it's not doing very well. Litecoin doesn't seem to be doing that bad. What have you had experience investing?
Well, I don't know if you'd call this experience. I say media days. So I guess I had to do the math here. 2011, friend of mine tells me about this thing called Bitcoin. You have to download Tor, which is this like IP proxy client. You have to put your money into this service called Dwala, which then transfers it to this platform called Mt. Gox, which then gives you a code that you burn onto a CD for your wallet. And he's like, this is going to be the thing. You can't do anything with the coins. At the time, there was like the Silk Road. So if you wanted to buy some like fun stuff, you could maybe use it for that. But he just thought
Yeah,
it was
yeah.
going to be like this thing.
When was this? Sorry, 2011.
2012.
Okay,
It might
pretty
have
early then.
been 2011, 2012 cusp. I can't remember exactly. And so I had just gotten a salary, and $500 was like it was a lot. I mean, it still is a lot of money, but it was a lot of money for me. And I decided I'd put in $500. $500 got me 22 Bitcoins.
Oh my god,
I don't know.
shit the
I
bed.
have to not look now. It was a lot of Bitcoins, and at the time, I didn't know anything about it, and nobody did really.
Yeah,
And I remember I gave myself a timeline of I think 6 months just to see what was happening. And I mentioned we wanted to buy a house at that time. I wanted to go freelance at that time. There's a lot of financial pressure. And after my trial period, I lost about $200 and I pulled out. So I lost money on Bitcoin back then. And if I
yeah.
had saved that, I'm just going to quickly, I'm just going to
Oh man, don't do it to
type in
yourself.
here 22 Bitcoin value. Let's see. $89,770.
Oh
Yikes.
shit! And last year that would have been a hell of a lot more.
I know. Well, the thing is for me that was like a good lesson that came out of that, which is why I say it wasn't really investing. It was more of a life lesson. It's like only invest what you can afford to lose.
Yeah, exactly.
I
Yeah,
just couldn't afford to lose it back then, so I didn't invest it. And had I lost it all and been out my 500, maybe that would have had a butterfly effect on everything else in my life. Had I kept it in and been able to sell it at the peak, I might have bought a house and stayed freelance and never ended up where I'm at now. And things. I'm not really one of the people that's like everything happens for a reason, but I mean, you can't knock that. I mean, I don't think that everything
Yeah.
happened for a reason. I think it's more like everything happens. Period. End of sentence. Everything happened.
Yeah, yeah, of
It
course.
happened, and it is responsible in some very tiny way for where I am today. So yeah, I lost some money, but it taught me about things, and here I am talking to you, and
Yeah,
it's
of
just
course, man.
interesting when you keep saying like this would be such an interesting movie, or I've never thought about my life like that. Every single transition and decision had been terrifying, and I was full of so much anxiety between like, should I do this or that? Should I leave this or should I stay there? And this has been kind of therapeutic in a way to talk about it with somebody and hear that perspective,
Yeah, yeah.
because I look back and it's like I'm very lucky that it worked out this way. At the time, it doesn't feel like that though. At the time, it feels terrifying and it feels like you're taking a step backwards, and it feels like you're giving something up, or like with the Bitcoin, like you just lost something. But
Yeah, of
when you
course.
can reflect on it like this and talk and laugh and hear somebody find joy in it, it's a pretty incredible thing. So I'm really appreciative to have had this time and talk with you.
Oh man, no, no, it's my pleasure. Well, thank you so much for your time, Elliot. I really do appreciate it. I know you got a lot on. You're a busy guy,
Hey,
and
I am just, like I said, so thankful for this opportunity, and to be introduced to your show and to listen to the other folks that you talk to. It was kind of intimidating because they're like quoting people, and they just had like such deep experience, and I was like, is this really is this something I'm capable of even doing? And I'm just so
absolutely, man,
thankful and
absolutely.
humbled to have the chance.
No, mate, thank you. It's been a pleasure. It really has. We'll do it again, and then yeah, I'll keep in touch on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you so much. I know it's kind of late for you, so your weekend's about to start, and I hope you have a great weekend as well.